going to be furthest than others. And the question that I have for you guys is, when you were a little kid, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up? You got it? I know there's a few smirks, you remember? Yeah. Anybody want to be an astronaut when they grow up? Maybe a doctor? Anybody want to be a princess? Yes, we got one in the back. She wanted to be a princess. I actually remember exactly what I wanted to be when I was a little kid when I grew up. I can remember my papa, who's here tonight. He came over and I was maybe 5 years old, and he called me over to him and he put his big hands on my shoulders and he asked me, Derek, when you grow up, what do you want to be? And it was the first time anybody asked, and I knew exactly what the answer was. And so I straightened my back and I pulled back my shoulders and I said, Papa, when I grow up, I want to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. And I was serious. And that was the first time ever that I realized that that wasn't really an acceptable answer. It turns out that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles don't get paid really well. They don't have any health benefits. And it was going to be really hard to raise a family in a sewer, is what I was told. So I thought about some other options that were out there, and my papa left and he came back to visit, and the next time that the same thing happened again, he called me over to where he was and he put his big hands on my shoulders and he said, Derek, when you grow up, what do you want to be? And I put a lot of thought into it as a small kid. I noticed that a lot of days in our neighborhood, this truck would come around and these guys would be on the back, and that looked like a lot of fun, I thought. And they would hop off and they would grab all the cans and they would throw them in the back, and that looked really helpful to my parents. And I thought it was really kind because they did it for everybody in the neighborhood, and so I had a pretty good answer. My papa said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I straightened my back and I pulled back my shoulders and I said, Papa, when I grow up, I want to be a garbage man. And that was strike two. And what I learned at a really early age is kind of the first point that I want to make, is that every great story has conflict. And at the age of 5 years old, I realized that to live my best story with my life, there was going to be some obstacles. The things that I thought were really important turned out that there were a lot of other perspectives on what's important in life. And when you think about it, that really makes sense. Every great story really does have conflict. My favorite movie ever, The Titanic. So that's probably too old for you guys. It's really just all right, a couple of people know it. It's really just a love story about a couple that falls in love on a cruise. What makes the story great is that the boat sinks, right? Without that conflict, it's just a regular story. One of my favorite business stories of where conflict is really important is that of Southwest Airlines, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. The story goes that they only had 4 planes, and they realized that to not go bankrupt, they were going to have to sell one of them. And they did, but instead of deciding to cut back their flights, they said, you know what, we're just going to figure out how to do the same number of flights with 3 planes that we used to do with 4. And that was when they really created the processes and the culture that made Southwest Airlines into the great company that it is today. Probably my favorite story is of Abraham Lincoln, an example of where somebody overcame conflict to accomplish something important. Abraham Lincoln was born into poverty. He lost 8 elections. Twice he failed in business, and he suffered a nervous breakdown where he stayed in bed for 6 months. As a young child, he lost his mother. Not long after that, he lost his sister. Then he lost his stepmother as well. He was engaged to be married, and his first fiancée tragically passed away. He lost about 5 or 6 elections before he won an election to Congress in 1846, and then in 1848 he lost his re-election. Mr. Stone, is that right? He lost his election for Senate in 1854. He lost again for Senate in 1858. And then he became president at probably the worst time possible, right on the brink of the Civil War. He had 4 children, and of those 4 children, only 1 grew to become an adult. I think Abraham Lincoln is a great example of a story where there's great conflict, and I think we can all agree with that. Einstein failed middle school math. Michael Jordan was cut from his JV basketball team. The story goes on and on. if you think of a story that really touches your heart, I can promise that you'll find conflict. For me, as I was sitting in your seats and I was going to college and then graduating from college, the main conflict for me was just, how do I live a story that really matters? What's something purposeful that I can do? I found some quotes at the time. Thoreau says that most men live lives of quiet desperation, but if you pursue the life you've dreamed of, you'll find success in the most common of hours. And I found where Gandhi said that true morality consists not in following the beaten track, but in seeking out the true path for yourself and fearlessly following it. I realized that the greatest joy in my life would be to find something that was really worth dying for long before I took my last breath, but I didn't know where to start. So what about you guys? Chances are you're experiencing conflict somewhere in your life. Maybe a lot of your friends got into their first school of choice, and you got into your plan B or plan C. I would just encourage you that this could be the beginning of a really great story. Maybe it's a challenge that you don't think that you can overcome. I would encourage you that this could be the beginning of a really great story. Maybe it's a relationship that's fallen apart or one that you never had. I would say that this could be the beginning of a great story. Maybe at some point you made a really big mistake or you made a bad decision. I would encourage you that this could be the beginning of a really great story. If you have a dream and people snicker at you and say, no, it's not possible, that's always the recipe for a really great story. The first point is that every great story has conflict. And what I think is so peculiar is that while we would all agree that we want to live a great story, and we all know that it takes conflict to live a great story, a lot of us will spend a majority of our lives trying to avoid conflict. So the first point is that every great story requires conflict. The second is that there will always be a good reason to avoid conflict. Can you guys imagine Lord of the Rings without any conflict? I couldn't, so I thought I would just write it out for you really quickly and read it to you. There once was a hobbit named Frodo who lived in a small village. One day a wizard showed up and told him he should take a vacation. What a great idea, Frodo thought. His friends were so excited, they decided to come along too, and everybody was really supportive. They planned everything ahead on TripAdvisor. Sam wanted to go to Florida to work on his tan, but in the end they decided to go to this great place called Mount Doom because there was a special for frequent flyer miles. The trip went so smoothly they couldn't believe it. At one point they weren't sure which way to turn and they hired a wonderful guy named Smeagol, who was completely trustworthy and just precious. When they arrived, they took a look around and said, "Wow, great trip, guys." They gave each other high fives and said, "Let's take a picture and post this on Instagram. And then let's go home." People loved that story so much that they made 3 movies about it. The truth is that if Frodo avoids conflict, he's really just a hobbit hitchhiker on a long vacation. I remember a specific time in my life when I thought about avoiding conflict, and for us it took about 16 months to get our company started in every story. And my best friend and I, Pete, we decided about 8 months into it, it was the most depressing times of our lives, to take a cross